To start with today, we are discussing creating an inclusive culture, and that is in relation to fairness, inclusion and respect. We run in the construction FIR sector program for short through the Supply Chain Sustainability School. It is essentially, it's a program that is aimed at bringing diversity and inclusion, or EDI, equity, diversity and inclusion, into the built environment sector. But we call it fairness, inclusion and respect because there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, essentially what we're talking about is creating workplaces where people want to come and they can really thrive. So we want a diversity of people coming from different backgrounds, different experiences, bringing innovation, different ways of thinking into the sector. But we also want to make sure that our whole workforce has an environment in which they can truly thrive. And for that, when we talk about EDI, as many of you around the room might know if you're working in this field yourself, we do find that some of our learners do either have a particular view of what EDI means, sometimes that it's not relevant to them or that it's not part of their job role, or they may see it as a separate function of a business where you do actually have an EDI officer in place. They may see that a bit like a HR function or a risk function as a separate function of a business and not relevant to their role or not specifically within their responsibilities. And we do have some people who come to this topic who have had perhaps negative experiences or experiences where they haven't been engaged in the topic, and whenever they see DEI or EDI, they tend to disengage. So we call it fairness, inclusion, respect because we are really trying to engage everyone in the topic, regardless of the acronyms that are used in that way. And we talk about fairness, inclusion, respect as being a responsibility of everyone in the workplace, from the leaders right down to those entry-level roles right up and everywhere in between. And this really, it's a people topic, it's a productivity topic, it's about innovation, it's about your workforce, it's about a lot of different things, and it connects up with all of the elements of different workplaces. So that's why we call it fairness, inclusion, respect, and it's got its own label and its own identity now as the FIR program. Okay, so industry snapshot. What does our sector look like? We'll first touch on. Then we'll look at what is FIR, fairness, inclusion, respect, and why it actually matters. And this is where we'll talk about how this is actually relevant to you or relevant to your workplaces and people you might be speaking to about the topic itself. And finally, we'll come to some actions. So what you can do to actually drive FIR forward. So starting with an industry snapshot of what our sector looks like, I'm going to ask a question of the group. Do you think it's easier or harder to get a job in the built environment sector if you're from one of these backgrounds? So firstly, if you're a woman. Secondly, if you're a Black or ethnic minority candidate or person from Black or ethnic minority background. Or thirdly, if you have a disability. More difficult for all. Yes, disability, yes. Disabled, disability, yep. A woman, yes. Probably disability. Okay, we'll dive into this further and we'll come back to this question. If we pop to the next slide. So this is a snapshot of our industry in 2023. So this data is taken at the end of 2023. It covers over 526,000 employees from 537 companies across the built environment sector. So 382 of those companies were actually small or medium businesses. So we're not just talking about large organisations here, we're talking about businesses right from micro right through to quite large businesses within those representative numbers. And in terms of the composition and the makeup of the sector, so you can see down in the green section, 29.1% of our surveyed data representatives are actually women. And we'll compare that to the previous year, the 2022 data. It has gone up because previously it was indicated at 23%. So we can see that the efforts to shift the percentage of women in the sector are moving in the right direction. A bit of a caveat there, because as we grow this survey and we have more and more businesses participating in it and more small to medium businesses in it, we do find that number is going to move, because we do tend to have more women represented in some smaller businesses, for example, which are a lot larger in our snapshot this year. But we are moving in the right direction. In terms of ethnic minority representation, the percentage of ethnic minority employees has actually decreased by 0.1%. So it's not a significant drop, but it is in the wrong direction, and it's still really far from the population data that we compare it to. So you can see along the bottom here, the ONS data sits at 18.5%. ONS stands for the Office of National Statistics. So that is our general population data that we compare our construction and built environment sector data to. We compare to the general ONS data, not the construction specific data, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we want to see the representation across the entire population. That's what we're really aiming for ultimately. And secondly, if we compared it to our current construction sector data, we would be making ourselves look pretty good, because the construction sector data isn't great as a whole when we compare that to the broader population and other industries that are moving forward in these areas quicker than we are. In terms of disability, 2.8% of people currently working in our sector identify as having a disability. That has actually upped 0.4% from the previous year. And we've also got an increase in the percentage of organisations that actually collect that data. So it's great that we've got more organisations who are collecting it, but still the percentage of organisations with unknown data, so that it means that they don't know whether their employees have disability or not, is still there. It's down 9%. So we've got more organisations collecting and reporting on it, which is fantastic. And given we've had such an increase in the number of organisations reporting, that's also showing that we do have a lot of businesses that are coming in at different sizes and different types of businesses that are collecting this data. But as you can see, 2.8% compared to the general population of 17.8%, we have a really long way to go. So those people who identify disability as being one of the harder elements to enter the sector with, you're certainly correct in that sense. When we look at the LGBTQIA plus data there, we've got 2.04% of our current employees represent that group. That in 2022, it was 1.7%. So we are seeing more people identifying as LGBTIQ plus, and also, I guess, more companies actually reporting on this data and realising the importance of collecting it. But we're still below the ONS data of 3.1%. Now, there are huge safety and psychological safety issues at play here in terms of those that want to be presenting that data and want to actually be self-identifying. And we also need to be mindful that we've had additional categories added in the 2023 census data. So we now also take data in relation to asexual, pansexual and queer categories that weren't previously collected in 2022. So if you are collecting this data, if you're not collecting this data in your organisation, my recommendation would be to start doing that. If you are already collecting it in your organisation, I would make sure that you're mirroring those options so you are actually getting data across all of the different elements that ONS collects. In terms of religion, the data collection on religion is poor, but those that have actually disclosed religion, interestingly, 26.5% of people have disclosed that they have a religious belief, compared to the ONS data of 56.9%. So that's a really interesting statistic. There is an element of self-reporting here, and whether the company is collecting the data, as well as actually whether people feel safe or whether they feel it's relevant to their role and whether they should be reporting it. And in terms of age, we do, in terms of younger people, we've had an increase in people who are younger, under 25, entering in the sector, and a decrease in those that are 50 plus in the sector. The shift is small, but it does hint that we are attracting more younger talent, which is great. We are still significantly behind the ONS working age data. So with 7.7% of those in our sector aged between 18 and 25, and 12.8% of the population is actually within that age group. So that's a big area of focus, along with retaining our older workforce and those who very much into the middle of their careers, or perhaps towards the end of their careers, depending on how much above that 50+ age group they are. So the data tells us that the sector has really significant FER issues to address. So let's look at gender disparity firstly. The question was, do you think it's easier or harder to get into the sector as a woman? And most of you said it's harder, and you would normally be correct. But interestingly here, when it comes to attraction, we don't have enough women applying. But when it comes to the actual application to success rates, women are actually faring fairly well if we can get them into those recruitment processes. So we're currently sitting at a rate of 24.8 women to 1 successful female candidate coming into the sector. When we compare that to men, the men are currently sitting at 33.3 to 1. So it is, if you can get to that stage where you are going through the recruitment process and the interview process and so on, you actually fare better if you are a woman than if you are a man at the moment. But we have this big disparity in that only 50% of the population identifies as female, yet only 29% of the sector do, and only 24.5% of applicants actually identify as women. We also have a persistent gender pay gap. That's sitting at 18.8%. There's real concerns when we look at the bonus pay gap, which is as high as 31.8%. And we're also losing younger women. So of those that leave the sector voluntarily, so that for reasons other than having lost their job or so on, 46% are leaving before the age of 34. And policies and practices around flexibility and parental leave and so on are really coming into play here. So we're seeing a big difference between organisations that are addressing this and have those flexible work practices and parental leave, fair parental leave policies in place, and just how much they're able to retain their staff. When we look at ethnic diversity, if you come from a Black or ethnic minority background, currently you're sitting at 13.6% of the sector. Yet, as we identified a moment ago, 18.5% of the population come from a Black or an ethnic minority background. There's already a 5% gap there with the general population. The real concern here is if you're an applicant, it's actually between 1.2 and 6.4 times harder to get a job in our sector. So our white candidates sit at 28.4 to 1. That means that it takes 28.4 candidates to achieve 1 successful hire if you are from a white background. But all ethnic minority groups actually have higher ratios than the white candidate ratio there. So for example, if you're an Indian applicant, you actually fare the worst. It will take 182.9 candidates from an Indian background to achieve 1 successful hire. And if you're from an Arab background, you're still looking at really high rates there as well. It's 104.9 to 1. When we compare that to the general population, we're talking about that 28.4 to 1 if you're white. That is a huge disparity that can only be explained through bias and lack of understanding the recruitment process. Because when we actually look at what's happening, and we do track across the various aspects of recruitment, right from the application stage, right through to interviews and who's actually getting a job based on the interviews, we can see that there's bias at play at all elements of that. So if you'd like further details on this, don't hesitate to reach out. We do have a full report that explains the data in full, and will give you the statistics for different groups under their various ONS categories, depending on background. But the ethnic minority group that fares the best, still worse than white candidates, but fares better than other ethnic minority groups, is actually mixed white and Black Caribbean candidates. But we also have an issue around retaining those from Black or ethnic minority backgrounds, because almost 50% of those leaving the sector, when they choose to do so, are actually doing so before the age of 34. So that's a real wake-up call for many companies that I speak to, that they're putting a lot of effort in at that front end of really attracting the talent, training up the talent, and getting people started on their careers, yet they're losing them before that mid-30s age group, which is a huge concern. So we're seeing just as many people walking out the door at the once they've been in the sector for a while as we are attracting into the sector, which is why our numbers aren't moving significantly. In terms of disability, how did our disabled workers fare? Well, we've touched on the fact that only 2.8% of our workers are identify as having a disability. Only 1.8% of applicants actually identify as having a disability. So it takes 25 disabled applicants for one successful hire. So if you can get into the recruitment processes, you're actually faring fairly well. You're faring quite close to the general statistic for women who are applying for the sector, and faring better, for example, than white men who are trying to get into the sector. But the difficulty there is we need a lot more attraction and a lot more retention of those with disabilities, as well as making sure our workplaces are safe environments in which people can identify their needs right at that early stage and make sure that those are supported right through their employment. And finally, in that last column, unfortunately, this is not showing up on your screen particularly well, but it will in the PDF version of the slides that I provide to you, that the data and monitoring aspect, we look at what companies are doing in their businesses and exactly how far they're progressing around collection and analysis of this type of information. Only 54.2% of companies are actually monitoring diversity, and many of those don't collect across all diversity metrics that we've been speaking about. And to give you an example of just how stark this is, keeping in mind that we need to have it's a legal requirement to have in place reasonable adjustments for those that have disabilities, but 37.5% of the companies that report into us don't have a reasonable adjustments policy. So very unlikely to be meeting that basic legal requirement around disability there. That's a lot of data to throw at you, and I'll let you absorb that, and we'll circulate some links to some further information if you want to dive into that further. But we've got a fairly good snapshot of what the sector looks like and where its shortcomings are and what we need to focus on. The next question I want to touch on is, what is FER and why does it actually matter? A lot of people, when they come to this topic, think, well, how is this actually relevant to me, and why do I need to care about this? When we use the phrase fairness, inclusion, respect, we've touched on this briefly earlier, but its core, FER is about creating workplaces where everyone wants to work and where they can actually achieve their best. So we talk about fairness, inclusion, respect as being good for everyone. It's everyone's responsibility, from the CEO and board down to the most junior positions up and everywhere in between. And what we're talking about is really, firstly, with fairness, treating everyone as an individual according to their needs. So that may not mean equal treatment for everyone. It's really about identifying different people's needs and making sure that they are able to participate and fully succeed in their roles. Making sure that you haven't got bias in your processes and approaches, and supporting people to do their best in your workplace. Inclusion is about making everyone feel like they're a key part of the team. So valuing the people that we work with and the skills and the different backgrounds that they bring to their role and to the organisation. And respect is really ultimately about creating an atmosphere where we can all succeed. So regardless of our background, our knowledge, our beliefs, and so on, when we come to our role, we actually can work as a team and we can really succeed together. So we are looking at, it does touch on the 9 protected characteristics under the Equality Act, for example, but we're looking much further than that, because we're looking at all the ways that we can ensure that everyone can participate, can belong, and can really succeed in the sector. When we talk about why FER is important to businesses, there is 4 key business challenges that our research shows keep coming up for businesses. So have a think as I go through these, whether any of these actually apply to your business. Firstly, winning work, ensuring an ongoing pipeline, particularly with current events and the health of the economy impacting business so much. That is a key concern, and often may be the primary concern or one of the primary concerns of businesses we speak to. Secondly, people. Attracting, recruiting and retaining talent is a huge driver of why businesses realise that FER is actually important to them. Thirdly, cost. This is talking about materials and energy, insurance, inflation. It's an expensive time to be in business, and all businesses need to keep costs to a minimum. And that's where we do find a lot of businesses are really starting to engage in this topic because they realise the value it can bring. And time, not enough of it. We all know that time costs money, and therefore that is a big factor. There's another factor that isn't always recognised by businesses, but I'm putting it here because it is a key reason why businesses should be caring about FIR, and that is in the yellow dot there, sustainability, because it's people who are actually going to drive a business's sustainability efforts. They need to engage the right people with the right skills in the right environment to actually benefit from the collaboration and the innovation that is necessary to achieve other environmental aspects, whether it's carbon reduction or biodiversity or waste reduction or so on. So that people in sustainability element is really critical. And I think that is one area where businesses are hopefully just starting to realise that the link between having workplaces that are engaging and allow everyone to thrive can actually help them achieve their sustainability goals. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail. So firstly, when we're talking about winning work, FIR is expected by both public and private sector, and this is growing. So I would highly recommend businesses don't use this as a tick box exercise. In terms of being an expected part of doing business, we've got the Equality Act, which sets out our 9 protected characteristics. We've got our public sector equality duty, which is actually section 149 of the Act itself. And that applies to public bodies and other organisations who are carrying out public functions. And that requires businesses to foster good relations between those with and without protected characteristics. And when I talk protected characteristics, very quickly, I'm talking age and disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. So it covers all different elements there. Then we've got the Social Value Act and the procurement rules, which are really setting a requirement for consideration of how the services you commission and procure might actually improve the economic, social and environmental wellbeing of an area. And interestingly, with 10% of the total tender score weighted to social value, and with fairness, inclusion, respect, or EDI actually being a big component of social value, it's becoming much more prevalent in the needs of procurement professionals and what businesses are doing when they're procuring their goods and services. So, for example, it's actually a theme in itself. Equal opportunity is a theme in itself of the procurement rules, PPN 0620. But of course, it's also an essential ingredient of all the themes, because ultimately how we achieve all of this comes back to people. In terms of a key component of sustainability, I've listed some of the elements of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals up there. That is the 17 interlinked objectives that serve as that shared blueprint for the peace and prosperity for people on the planet. And you'll see that a lot of those goals actually hook directly back into people and have elements of what we're talking about when we speak about fairness, inclusion and respect. And thirdly, it's important for clients. So here's a couple of quotes which are good examples. These ones are from the transport area, but we want to work with contractors and consultants that really genuinely have equality, diversity and inclusion on their agendas. And this one is from the Strategic Road Network report produced by National Highways. And they say, we are requiring our suppliers to demonstrate how they meet our equality, diversity and inclusion objectives, and regularly assessing our suppliers' maturity in relation to these objectives. And I can say National Highways is actually very hot to trot on this, along with a number of our partners. They are embedding, they have had requirements to participate in our diversity survey for a number of years, and they are starting to embed that. It's been in policy for a while, embedding it into their actual contractual arrangements as well. So that's a really good example of just how far clients and head contractors are going with this. They see it as really important, and they see it as a requirement right through their supply chain, right from those that are top tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, right down to the smallest providers they work with. So how does this play out in terms of the people challenge and the talent aspect? Well, you can't meet your business goals without the right people. I'm sure all of you around the room would be very familiar with this concept. We think there's three important things to remember in relation to people. Firstly, people choose organisations that they see as serious about fur. So people want to work in fur environments. According to a World Economic Forum Future of Work report from last year, over half of Gen Z workers would not accept a role in a company that doesn't have diverse leadership. So we've got a really strong younger generation driving, in many respects, some of the developments in this space. Yet we know that businesses are actually fishing in a small pool of talent and skills. So it's getting harder to find skilled workers. And that's a sector-wide challenge. There's intricacies and differences between different roles and different subsectors, but generally as a sector, it is getting hard to find the right talent, the right skills and the right attitude. So just looking at construction alone, we refer to the well-recognised skills shortage. CITB thinks we need 266,000 people more by 2026. And we need to retrofit, for example, 29 million properties, which is a 70% increase in that requirement in 5 years. So we've got shortages in infrastructure, repair, maintenance, and so on, and certainly that's flowing right through to the market segments that support the infrastructure and construction sector. We've also got an ageing workforce. So just 10% of our workforce are aged between 16 and 24. In 1990, for comparison, that was actually 22%. So we've gone from 22% down to 10% in that age 16 to 24 bracket. We've got 25% of our workforce set to retire in the next 10 years. So we've actually flipped that demographic, because in 1990, that was less than 10%. So with less people coming in at that earlier age group and more people looking to retire in the next 10 years, we really need to be promoting and engaging people to come into our sector and retaining them. And then finally, and of course, we do know that construction workers, for example, are a typically difficult field to find jobs, because a lot of people find jobs through word of mouth in the sector than competitive application. So we find construction companies are a good example. They're often struggling to find the right workers because of the nature of how construction is recruited, along with those image and perception problems that the construction sector faces. So I think according to CITB, only 2% of young people surveyed actually consider construction to be their preferred industry. Most industries are considered more attractive than our sector. And then finally, the third element really is that we need to retain the talent once recruited, but people stay in happy environments that meet their needs. And this is where we really focus on the practices and policies and approaches we need to have in place to keep the workforce happy, and to really teach businesses that you can retain staff even during downturns, even without pay rises, if you are prepared to offer other benefits like flexibility. And if you have a workplace that demonstrates fairness, inclusion, respect, and keeps workers happy, it actually gives you a competitive edge. So in terms of cost, fur minimises risks and saves cost. There are many, many reasons for this, and generally fur is actually good for business, and it makes good business sense to have a commitment to fur. So we've got lots of reasons here. Safety risks, fairness, inclusion, respect actually creates safer workplaces, because when people feel included, they're much more able to speak up about safety issues and protect others. We've got people risks, that talent, attraction, recruitment, retention aspects that we've touched on already. Innovation. Fur actually helps find innovative ways to solve problems, and for those ideas to be shared and listened to and assessed fairly, we need to make sure that we've got that inclusive and respectful approach. We see improved returns from businesses that have fairness, inclusion, respect approaches. So we're seeing actual impact on fundamental business performance. Meeting customer expectations is a big one, both understanding those customer expectations and also recognising that this is part of your commercial licence to operate, and you need to understand your customers, and what better way to understand them to have representation of your customer groups within your own workforce. We're seeing staff engagement. There's advantages for reputation. We've already touched on that competitive advantage of recruiting and attracting people, but also the advantage around reputation when you are seen to be a business that is driving forward in this space, because other businesses, suppliers and clients and so on will be much more likely to want to work with you. We've also see increased productivity, increased collaboration, and would be remiss of me as a former lawyer not to say the legal compliance aspect of this is also really important, because we've got employment and discrimination and harassment cases published online. We know businesses can miss out on work, and they can miss out on funding based on legal breaches. So there is both a duty to disclose, but there's also a ability to search this type of breach, and that does trip businesses up in many cases. So focusing around the legal compliance aspect is really important as well. So ultimately, for businesses, is not a nice to have. It's something that you can't afford not to care about. And it's also intrinsic to meeting the challenges that businesses face in the future. And it's not just me saying that. So you can actually see in practice, this is a snapshot from our previous 2023 FIR Culture Impact Survey. So we survey those who are engaging with our FIR programs, specifically designed to increase their understanding and application of FIR principles. You can see down the green side on the left that FIR is improving fundamental business performance. So 52% of those surveyed say it actually improves productivity in their business. 66% say they've had improved engagement with stakeholders, and 52% have actually found it helps win new business. And then when we look on the purple side, on the right-hand side, we've got big benefits across areas of the business. So whether that is better understanding of FIR amongst leaders, whether that's improved behaviours in the organisation, 77% report improved behaviours, right through to improved health and safety, 59%, and improved flexible working policies. 64% of our businesses find that it has improved flexible working policies to be involved in the FIR program and engaging in FIR principles. So lots of benefits. I touched on collaboration. There we go. 67% report improved collaboration and retention of talent and recruiting a more diverse team and so on. Finally, time. I won't need to go into this in too much detail, but effectively, FIR saves time for both workers within the business and also the business itself. So it saves time in terms of innovation, because we know, and there's a lot of data and research on this, but diversity in approaches actually solves problems quicker and comes up with some more innovative solutions to problems as well. We see happier people, which means reduced downtime and reduced absenteeism, and finally reduced turnover. Losing a staff member or having a staff member leave actually costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot of time, and it involves a lot of people management time. So we want to get that right. So those are the reasons that businesses are generally interested in FIR. Just to touch on that additional reason that I really want businesses to be driving home is that link between FIR and sustainability. So if we just look at one area of diversity around gender equity, we know that it has a huge impact on other areas of sustainability, including environmental and performance. So on the left-hand side, Project Drawdown is a national government organisation, non-government organisation, sorry, an NGO, that's looking at practical solutions to global warming. And it compared over 100 solutions to global warming and found that educating girls and enabling family planning are actually the most powerful solutions to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So they predicted that empowering women could actually prevent over 100 billion tonnes of emissions over the next 30 years. That's between 2020 and 2050. And that's the equivalent of something like 722 million cars. So the next time someone talks to you about the importance of different environmental approaches to global warming, you will also be able to add in there, but don't forget the people element, because educating girls and family planning actually ranked higher than solar farms and rooftop solar, and interestingly, not far behind tropical forests and plant-rich diets in improving our carbon emissions. So do jump onto Project Drawdown's website. There's a great quiz to test your knowledge of the most effective ways to curb climate change, and it's quite fascinating to look into those. Very quickly, ISAW is the International Strategic Accelerator for Women, and it has found through its research and reporting that the governance is actually the greatest opportunity for gender equality. So where you have senior executives and board positions with influence over key decisions and influence over the internal control and other governance activities of an organisation, the more gender balance you have at the top, the more leadership behaviours you will see that positively impact decisions across the wider dimensions of environmental, social and governance. So whether that's setting environmental standards or raising trust with stakeholders, the greater gender equality you have, the greater chance you have at actually succeeding at all of those elements. And finally, this third one, the Gender Equity Insights Report from 2020. Lots of people say when you talk about the data and the research around these elements that shows a link, but it doesn't show a causal link, between those types of representation and the actual results. But this data does. So this is the first report that showed a causal link between the leadership and performance. And they looked, the Bankwest Curtin Economics Centre looked at women in leadership and the companies that were outperforming their peers, and basically found the more women you have in leadership, the higher likelihood of the company outperforming its other companies. So the report saw that increasing the number of women in senior leadership led to better performance and outperformance across all of the profitability and performance metrics. So that's return on equity, EBIT, earnings before interest and tax, sales per worker, return on assets, Tobin's Q and dividend yield, if that's your jam and you're familiar with these. But basically, gender was the biggest denominator in terms of really driving those results. So that's showing just one area of FIR, but you will find performance correlation across different characteristics and those non-protected characteristics as an example. So to finish off, that's a lot of information. How do you take that and what can you actually do with that to drive fairness, inclusion, and respect forward? Well, if you are looking at things for businesses to start doing, and this is some statistics coming from our Culture Impact Survey again. So it's 1,270 supply chain school members in early 2023 who had participated in the FIR program, contributing to this data. But only 24% of respondents in our survey said they had actually addressed FIR issues in recruitment. So that's a big area for improvement. People management is another huge area for improvement. So only 18% of our respondents had actually fully embedded FIR into their people management processes. And, for example, flexible working and whistleblowing policies and so on are really important ways that you can make sure that you're managing your people and you have the policies and procedures in place to make sure that you're supporting a culture of fairness, inclusion, respect in your organisation. When we turn to monitoring, only 1 in 4 firms actually monitor the diversity of their teams, although positively, we have a further 55% who've either started that process or who are achieving some pockets of good practice. So we have more and more companies actually monitoring diversity, but we need to see that really shift, and we need to make sure that the advantages of monitoring is really recognised and being taken up by companies. And finally, in terms of procurement, only 18% of our members were actually fully embedding FIR principles in their procurement process. It's good to hear that over half are actually considering what steps they can take, but when you think about how you can use your procurement and supply chain management practices to drive change, it's a huge opportunity here, and you can influence how your suppliers think. So if you don't know where to start, I would recommend one of our items available, one of our learning resources available is our FIR growth assessment. That is an assessment for businesses that assesses your maturity around these 5 different elements of FIR, right from your commitment through your employment practices, working practices, site environment, and down to your supply chain. So you can jump on and do that maturity assessment tool and benchmark where you sit against the industry and also it will spit out a 10-point learning plan for you as a bit of a roadmap to start on your improvement journey. There's a link here to the diversity survey, which is currently open. It's free to participate. We want as many organisations contributing to this data as possible. If your organisation is a bit worried about what happens to the data and so on, you don't need to be, because it's aggregated data that goes into the survey, and we provide you with a report on where you sit against the ONS data and the benchmarked industry data at the end of the process. But no one else gets to see exactly where you sit. So that's information that you put into our survey, but won't be disclosed unless you'd like to disclose that yourselves within your own supply chain. So that survey is the largest built environment sector data capture on agreed diversity metrics across the sector. We are trying to expand that. The Construction Leadership Council actually has in mind over 1 million workers represented by 2025. So we'd love your support in getting that diversity survey as big and as broad across the sector as possible, because the more data we have, the better we are able to diagnose what's happening in the sector and really target our efforts, our training, our initiatives, and so on to really addressing those issues. So I will leave you with some links after the session today, and please feel free to jump on and get some further information, or reach out if you'd like any more. These are all the elements of the FIR program. Do jump on and have a look. We've got quite a lot in the program, and it is specifically designed to help you and your business. So there's tools, training, case studies. There's our FIR Ambassador program if you'd really like to be trained on how to deal with fairness, inclusion, respect, and really drive forward progress within your businesses and supply chain. That's open to you as well. And it's easy to access. You just join as a member. It's actually free to join as a member of the school, either as an individual or a corporate member, and you'll get access to all of the learning and development that we offer. Just on the next slide, there's a couple of links which we will share with you. There's a whole heap of learning and resources there, and there's a QR code that will take you directly to the relevant page to access all of that. What I'd like to leave you with is a bit of a thought about how you might start to action this. So how you might use your own influence to drive the FIR agenda forward. And I would suggest these are the steps that we'd love you to take. It's starting with that self-education piece. Moving on to the acting inclusively, making sure that you're being a solution finder, that you're not being ableist, that you're normalising difference and promoting representation in your own organisations and decision making. Staying engaged. Many of you may be working in the EDI field yourselves, or in HR roles, or in roles that support your employee reference groups and so on. It can be a hard slog. The results may take time, and there is a lot of pushback, and certainly at times like this where we've got such horrific stuff happening out there in the community, never has there been a time more relevant and more appropriate to be pushing forward for in our workplaces and supporting our communities. So don't be disheartened. Progress is positive, but collaboration and continuous engagement is how we're going to get there as a sector. And finally, setting personal and organisational goals. I would challenge you to take one thing away from today and action it, whether that is having a think about what you're doing in your role or in your management responsibilities if you're in a management position, or having a think if you're not sure whether your organisation has some of these principles in place, having a look into that, seeing whether your organisation is actually contributing to the diversity survey, and if not, asking why not, and perhaps encouraging them to do so. And then thinking about just how you might be able to collaborate both within your organisations and across your supply chain to really drive this forward. Ultimately, I love this quote from Barack Obama, because change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And I think this is really apt for the fairness, inclusion, respect area, because everyone can make a difference and everyone can help us drive this agenda forward. So that's it from me. I'll jump to my final slide and leave that up there for over questions, but I realise I've been talking for a long time, so I'd like to open up to the floor and answer any questions that you might have. What surprised you the most, Anthea, when you first heard the data?
my biggest surprise was that statistic around ethnic minority candidates, and the fact that I thought we weren't attracting ethnic minority candidates, but it's not that. And we've got a load of work to do around unconscious bias. Yeah, that was my biggest, when I first heard it, I thought, oh my goodness, there's a myth that we're not attracting ethnic minorities. Absolutely. Did I see a comment or no? I thought I might. Oh, we go. Rebecca's made a comment. So Rebecca's saying, really interesting to see and hear the impact within the businesses. Are we speaking to a head of HR after this? Yeah. I mean, the other thing I think is really comes out strongly in this is the business case, all the reasons why we should be doing that. And I think all of us on the call need to be sharing some of the stuff that Cathryn just told us in our businesses, because it's just, I think there's still a lot of businesses where it's seen as a nice to have, and ED&I is not a nice to have anymore.
Absolutely. And we recognise that businesses will come to this, and leaders of businesses will come to this from different views. It'd be lovely if they came from the moral point of view, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And really, directors of businesses have responsibilities to shareholders and to their stakeholders. So we recognise that, and hopefully I've given you an insight into some of the ways that we talk to businesses about the importance of this, because you might identify that's a really big issue within your business, or that might actually resonate with the leaders that you're talking to. And yeah, so please feel free to use any of the data, any of the links in there, or reach out to me if you want any further information, because sometimes it's just about finding the right hook to get those interested and engaged, and then really driving that forward.
Great. Yeah. So we will be sharing the slides. So we could send a PDF of the slides. I could do that, Cathryn. I can turn this into a PDF to everyone who was on the call today. We will be sharing the recording on the resources section. So if you haven't got access to the members' resources, let me know and I'll get you access. And encourage people to watch it. In fact, you may want to watch it again, because we covered a hell of a lot there. So feel free to watch it again, and please share what you've learned with other people, and please join us for future webinars when we run future webinars as well. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you so much, Cathryn. And what you won't know is Cathryn has joined us from Perth in Western Australia today. You would never know. So thank you for staying up to run the webinar for us. And yeah, get in touch if anyone's got any questions. Get in touch with me, and as I say, we'll share the slides and we'll share the recording as well.